Welcome back to Morning Joe. It's 46 past the hour. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, an Afghanistan war veteran, accused President Trump of faking a disability to get out of military service during the Vietnam War during an interview yesterday. It was a reference to a long disputed diagnosis of bone spurs that Trump says kept him from serving.
I don't have a problem standing up to somebody who was, working on season 7 of Celebrity Apprentice when I was packing my bags for Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, it's not about him.
Do you have a question? Do you think he should have served in Vietnam?
Well, I have a pretty dim view of his decision to use his privileged status to fake a disability in order to avoid serving in Vietnam.
You believe he faked a disability?
Do you believe he has a disability? Yeah. Yeah. At least not that one. No, I don't mean to. No, this is actually really important because I don't mean to trivialize disability, but I think that's exactly what he did. When you think about the way somebody can exploit the system, and needless to say, the way he has treated and mocked disabled people is just one more example of the many affronts to just basic decency that this president has inflicted on this country. But manipulating the ability to get a diagnosis. I mean, if you were a conscientious objector, I'd admire that. But this is somebody who I think it's fairly obvious to most of us took advantage of the fact that he was the child of a multimillionaire in order to pretend to be disabled so that somebody could go to war in his place. And I know that dredges up old wounds from a complicated time during a complicated war. But I'm also old enough to remember when conservatives talked about character as something that mattered in the presidency. And so I think it deserves to be talked about.
So powerful.
Michael Steele, so powerful. What Mayor Pete said was so powerful there. Also, though, the facts are particularly damning for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. He can't really fight back that he dodged the draft and used his father's VIP doctor and lied to get out of Vietnam, and he can't do that. He can't hide the fact that on the day that he graduated from an elite Ivy League school that his very wealthy father got him into, that 40 young men died in Vietnam that very day. Well, Donald Trump had spent the last 4 years being a playboy on campus, playing golf, tennis, football, doing all the things that a very active, healthy college student would do. Another thing also that probably should be troubling for Donald Trump is the fact bone spurs don't go away. I mean, unless you have an operation or treat them.
Was there a surgery?
And yeah, if he has a surgery, perhaps we can see records of that or evidence of that. But we, of course, know he never had any surgery because he never had bone spurs, and he did, in fact, allow another working class American to go fight in his spot, and 40 people died just the very day he graduated from college.
Yeah, I think perhaps maybe Donald Trump can get Dr. Vindibun Bong to go out and get him a new, a new medical record on that. But what I appreciated about what we just saw with Mayor Pete was the measured, precise argument as a veteran, talking about a difficult war, a complicated war at a complicated time, not with histrionics, not with, the kind of, stabbing accusations, but just laid out the case. And I think that's one of the interesting challenges as Mayor Pete begins to rise up this Democratic primary ladder for his opponents. How do they meet that? without coming off sort of screeching against Donald Trump. In every instance where Mayor Pete has gone up against the president, directly and indirectly, Joe and Mika, he has been very measured. That sort of deep resonance in his voice connotes the seriousness of the issue he's talking about. And he's not afraid to, quote, go there. And I think that's a very interesting challenge for not just President Trump, but one inside the Democratic primary process, as this mayor sort of carves out a very unique space among all the other Democrats, including Joe Biden, in this run-up to the general election.
Yeah, the debate over
Absolutely.
service is not one President Trump wants to have with Pete Buttigieg. I want to put up a poll, Donnie, and show you a new Monmouth poll, as you can comment on Buttigieg and also on these numbers. This shows Joe Biden at 33% now, up 6 points just from a few weeks ago. Bernie Sanders at 15%. And look at Senators Harris and Warren both climbing now up into double digits. What do you see there?
Well, I see a president in trouble, and here's why. When I looked at Buttigieg, I always go, okay, let's picture these two people on stage, and you see Buttigieg in one way, clearly having real counterpunching to Trump, a veteran up there just calling him out. And I think about Kamala Harris and her strength as I watched her prosecutorial chops a few weeks ago, and I think of the stature of Biden. And I go back to something that happened a couple of weeks ago when Trump started calling Biden Sleepy Joe. Now Joe Scarborough, you mentioned a few weeks ago that Trump does not have this magic potion. Everybody thinks Trump's got a bag of tricks and he's going to pull it out.
Right.
That's we're no longer in Apprentice season 1. We're in Celebrity Apprentice season 7. That stuff is not working anymore. So you take two things. You take a guy that basically already the first time out, it was fresh. He was calling his adversaries names. That's old. That's jumped the shark. And on top of that, 3 or 4 candidates, far superior to Hillary Clinton as far as putting them on stage, how they stack up in different ways. And to me, those two facts bode very, 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 very troubling for President Trump.
And you know, the thing is, Donnie, people always forget is the fact that Donald Trump lost by almost 3 million votes to Hillary Clinton. And yes, Hillary had some challenges as a candidate. She said to us when we interviewed her in South Carolina that she was not good at politics. She was more of a policy person, was the first to admit that. You know, and Nick, you go through that campaign, you go through the mistakes that happened, you go through the fact that the FBI director really kept Donald Trump's campaign alive by releasing a letter 10 days beforehand. But also, when you run as the incumbent instead of the challenger, which basically Donald Trump did last time, you've got to answer for the fact that you promised universal health care for all and ended up lying about that. You promised that people's health care premiums would be lower. You lied that their deductibles would be lower. You lied that their coverage would be better. You lied that you were going to have a tax cut for middle-class Americans. Another lie. That you were going to focus on working-class Americans and bring manufacturing jobs back to America. Again, just one lie after another, not to the media, to the voters. That is going to be extraordinarily hard for Donald Trump to defend when those 30-second ads start rolling on TV that show what he said in 2016 and show how their lives. Oh, and by the way, not only did Mexico not pay for the wall, Donald Trump didn't build that wall, even though Republicans owned Washington for the first 2 years.
Well, Joe, I think this is exactly the point that Pelosi is making to her caucus. This is why she's trying to keep her caucus away from impeachment. She wants the campaign to be about these issues and these policies and to be a referendum on the president's performance in office and not a culture war or a battle over his impeachment. But this also shows, I think, the most important number in those polls you put up there is Warren up by 5. She is rising, and Sanders is falling.
I love it.
And so Mayor Pete is still a second-tier candidate at this point. He's great at creating these kind of viral moments in politics. He's great at getting coverage. He's incredibly good at giving the Democratic base the tweaking of the president that they crave, but in a way that seems, kind of meaningful and respectful. But Warren is the one who came out and said, I want to abolish student debt. And that is going to get a serious response from voters.
You know, Mika, we've said we haven't understood why Elizabeth Warren had not been connecting more early on. She is connecting. She is slowly building. This is exactly what you want to do. Kamala Harris also slowly building up. They seem to be 3 and 4 in these races. Bernie keeps dropping. We can dig into the polls more and figure out exactly why that is. But make no mistake of it, Elizabeth Warren is on the move up for now, and so is Kamala Harris, with, of course, Pete Buttigieg. And we're going to talk to Al Sharpton about this. Pete Buttigieg is at 6%, not higher, only because he is not getting the support of black Democratic voters right now. We've got Al Sharpton coming up. We're going to ask him why.
Also coming up, we'll talk to one of the 2020 Democratic hopefuls when Congressman Tim Ryan joins the conversation. Talk about his campaign, how he plans to win over the blue-collar voters that helped Trump win the White House. Plus, much more on the escalating war of words between President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and the praise the president essentially forced his staff to heap on him. It was so embarrassing to watch, but he did it to justify his ability to lead. We're back in 3 minutes with that.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.